$5 for anyone willing to take my boring wife out for dinner. Ethan said that line between the sound of clinking glasses and music rising in the background. He said it like I wasn't standing right next to him. And the saddest part wasn't the sentence itself. It was the moment the whole table burst into laughter. They laughed so easily. They laughed like I was just a side character they could pull out whenever they needed entertainment. I didn't laugh. I just looked straight at the glass in my hand and felt something shift, very clearly. But to understand why that line cut so deep, we need to go back to when we first walked into the party tonight. The moment when everything looked normal, but was already foreshadowing what was coming. I'm Lauren. I work in strategic analysis, a job that requires seeing the structure of a problem, reading people's motives, and noticing the gaps most others skip over. I'm not the type who likes attention. I talk little, observe a lot, but everyone who's ever worked with me has given me a level of respect I've never had to ask for. Except Ethan. Ethan is my husband, the sales director, the man who knows exactly how to light up any room he walks into. He's smart, ambitious, confident, in a way that can sometimes swallow the person standing in front of him. When the banquet hall doors opened, the light pouring from the crystal chandeliers made the whole room glow with a kind of beauty that felt elegant and cold at the same time. Ethan walked in with me, but within seconds it was as if I'd vanished from his line of sight. People rushed over, shook his hand, clapped him on the shoulder, congratulated him on the massive deal the company had just closed. Ethan shines in moments like this, and I stood next to him, watching him get praised from every direction. That didn't bother me, but the way he treated me did. The first person who approached him asked, "Ethan, who are you here with?" He tilted his head, didn't look at me, and said quickly, "This is Lauren," like he was naming a distant coworker. He didn't introduce me as his wife. He didn't place a hand on my back. He didn't give me a place beside him in the conversation. The moment he finished, he turned away and kept talking to the other man. I stood there with a thin, polite smile, but inside it felt like he just nudged me aside, invisible, subtle, but intentional. Another group pulled Ethan into their circle. I stood next to him, but they didn't look my way. Not because they were rude, but because Ethan never gave them a reason to know who I was. He angled his body slightly away from me, as if he was using his own stance to block me from their line of sight. A small movement, but obvious to anyone who pays attention. When I tried to add a comment to the conversation, Ethan cut me off with a loud laugh, then jumped in to answer someone with that excited tone he uses. He didn't glance over to see what I was about to say. He didn't notice that my words had disappeared into the air. I stood there, quiet. Not hurt in a soft way. Hurt in a clear, cold way. Ethan didn't want me getting attention tonight. I realized it when a woman asked if I worked in the industry. I opened my mouth to answer, and Ethan slipped in. "She's more into quiet things." A light sentence, but he used it to close every question that might lead back to me. The woman gave me a polite smile and shifted straight to asking Ethan about the new deal. And just like that, the conversation revolved around him again. I stood beside him, completely cut out of a discussion I should have had space in. I didn't want to steal his spotlight. I never have. But the way he erased me, as if my presence might make him look less perfect, made the air heavy in a different way. I watched him for a little longer. His eyes didn't look for me. His hand didn't reach for me. His stories didn't include me. And it reminded me of so many moments in the past months. The times he talked about his career, but never mentioned the person who helped him see a way through every time he hit a wall. The times he showed off his pride, yet never thought to rest a hand on my back at events like this. Tonight wasn't the first time. But tonight, when I saw him avoid my eyes so deliberately, I knew this wasn't carelessness. This was intentional. Ethan wanted tonight to be about him, and only him. He wanted me close enough to frame his image, but far enough that no one would know I could think, analyze, or see through whatever he was trying so hard to hide. I stood in that loud circle feeling like I was outside all of it. A soft kind of distance, but a very clear one. I've always trusted my instincts, and my instinct said Ethan wasn't avoiding me by accident. He was avoiding me for a reason, and I sensed it before he did. Tonight wouldn't end like the other nights. That moment, when I realized Ethan was deliberately keeping me out of sight, was when I knew. The thing that was off wasn't the party. It was us. Ethan kept talking to the people around him. and I stood beside him with one very clear feeling. I was being placed exactly where he wanted me. Close enough, but not to be seen. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It started showing through his actions. A man in the group turned to me and asked gently, "Lauren, what do you think about?" But before he could finish, Ethan cut in with another story, pulling the whole table back to him and stopping the question meant for me, as if it had never existed. The man gave an awkward smile, then turned back to the group. And I understood perfectly. Ethan didn't want me in the conversation. I stayed calm. Calm has always been my strongest language. But tonight, it wasn't calm anymore. It was something colder settling inside me. The people around us kept talking about the deal, about strategy, about Ethan's vision. Every word they used made the distance between me and him even clearer. I stood next to my husband, but it felt like I was just a faint outline behind layers of lights and laughter. A woman stepped up, raised her glass toward Ethan, then glanced at me with a half smile. "I'm sure you don't really understand what he does, right?" The way she said it made me feel like an accessory, nice to look at, irrelevant if I didn't understand anything. I looked straight at her. "I understand enough." My answer was simple, but I saw the slight jerk in her expression. She didn't expect me to respond, but Ethan didn't let me say more. He laughed, gave my shoulder a light tap as if he was saving the conversation. But really, he was shutting it down. "She likes quieter things," he said. That line again, the same way he used to push me out of his space. I watched him tilt his head while talking to someone else, his body angled just enough so I was no longer within the group's line of sight. Not accidental, not coincidence. He was arranging the image he wanted, and I didn't belong in that frame. The room felt heavier by the minute. More people, more laughter, more noise. And the louder it got, the more I felt myself drifting away from Ethan in a way logic couldn't explain. I stepped back a little to catch my breath, and that's when I saw Mark across the room. Mark is the company's new CFO, someone I'd met a few times during internal meetings. He was talking to someone, but his eyes were on me. Not curious, not pitying. It was the look of someone who noticed something off. Mark didn't come over. He just glanced, quick but long enough for me to know he'd registered how strange Ethan's behavior toward me was. That look brought me back into focus, even though we didn't exchange a word. When I returned to Ethan's side, I saw him scanning the room as if searching for someone. But he wasn't looking for me. He was avoiding someone. He kept shifting where he stood, angling his body away when a man across the room started walking in our direction. I followed his line of avoidance and saw someone who looked like a senior executive, someone who clearly wanted to speak to Ethan. Ethan pretended he didn't see him. That movement was small, but to me, someone who notices everything, it was unmistakable. He was avoiding, not accidentally. I was about to ask if something was wrong, but right then his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, then immediately flipped it face down when he realized I was standing close. "Just work stuff," he said quickly. I didn't ask anything else, not because I believed him, but because the way he reacted felt familiar. Familiar in the way someone reacts when they're hiding something. A message that isn't important doesn't need to be covered. A normal text doesn't make someone go instantly defensive, but Ethan did. This wasn't just about him dismissing me at the party. This was about him not wanting me to know a part of what he was doing tonight. And that was the first clue to a much bigger twist. The party kept getting louder. People lifted their glasses, talked over one another, laughed harder. But in all that noise, I felt myself drifting farther from my husband. Not by steps, but by the truth that was slowly coming into focus. I watched him from the side, a smile stretched wider than what felt natural. His story repeating strong words just to impress, his gestures slightly exaggerated. The Ethan at this party wasn't the man I used to know. He looked like a version built for display, meant to showcase success, and he was afraid that if I stood too close, people might see the cracks he didn't want to admit existed. My hands felt cold, not because the room was chilly, but because I was watching the truth unfold with unnerving clarity. Ethan was doing everything he could to make me invisible on the night he wanted to shine. I stepped a little closer, testing whether he'd notice, but Ethan was already raising his glass for the third time, then the fourth. He was drinking more than he ever did at important events. With each sip, his smile stretched wider, his voice grew louder, and the filter on his words thinned fast. I knew this kind of drinking. It wasn't drinking to have fun. It was drinking to forget something that was making him uneasy. And when Ethan started talking over people, interrupting, getting louder than the room itself, I realized what both instinct and logic were telling me at the same time. He was about to say something he wouldn't be able to take back. Something that would expose the deepest part of his disrespect and trigger the twist he never saw coming. I looked at the glass in Ethan's hand, and for the first time tonight, I felt myself standing right at a clear dividing line. From here on, nothing would be the same. Ethan started drinking more than usual, and as I watched him from close range, it felt like I was looking at a stranger. The wine glass in his hand wasn't what worried me. What worried me was the growing space between us, a space created not by indifference, but by something Ethan didn't want me to know. That moment reminded me of the period when he was completely stuck. Before tonight's deal became the reason this entire room was raising their glasses for him. That night, Ethan sat slumped in front of his laptop, eyes red from too many sleepless hours. On the table were thick analysis files, long reports, and a stream of urgent messages from the partners. He was trapped at a critical bottleneck. The project's hedging risk was out of balance, and without a fix, the whole proposal would be rejected. When I walked in, he didn't look up. He just spoke in a tired, broken voice. "I'm missing something, Lauren. Everything looks right, but it still doesn't work." I didn't answer right away. I pulled a chair over, sat beside him, and looked through all the data. Not to do the work for him, but because I could see the tension in his shoulders. The kind he couldn't hide no matter how hard he tried to look in control. After a few minutes of reading, I set my hand on the table. "I think you're making the wrong assumption," I said. Ethan looked up. "Which one?" I pointed to the risk analysis section. "You're trying to prove the performance is strong enough to cover the volatility. But your partners aren't looking for performance. They're looking for stability. You need to shift the angle, not from profit, but from resilience." I explained slowly, piece by piece, so he could see the structure of the problem. The gap isn't in the numbers. It's in where he's placing the emphasis. And if he flips the way he evaluates it, the project shows up as an entirely different version. Ethan looked at me. For the first time in days, I saw him exhale more freely. "Lauren, this makes sense," he said, almost whispering. The next day, he used that exact perspective in the meeting, and it changed everything. The partners not only dropped their concerns, they even called Ethan's proposal thorough and sharp. He came home and hugged me the moment he walked through the door. "You saved me from a huge loss," he said, smiling for real. But what he said that day didn't weigh as much as what he didn't say in the weeks that followed. When the contract was signed, he told the success story over and over, as if it were a battle he fought alone. I wasn't upset at first. I thought he was just excited. But then the excitement turned into habit. And the habit turned into him erasing me from the story. I remember exactly how it felt when I happened to see the proposal Ethan submitted to the executives before the final review. On the risk analysis page, the key section I had walked him through, there was a paragraph written almost exactly the way I'd explained it to him that night. Every sentence, every structure, nearly unchanged. But next to that analysis, under contributors, there was only one name. Ethan Miller. No, with insights from Lauren. No small note, not even a dot suggesting I existed in that part of the process. I stood there staring at that page for a long time. Not because I wanted credit, I didn't need that. But because I realized something. Ethan wanted to preserve the image of being the one who carried the team. And my intelligence, instead of being something he was proud of, had become something he saw as a quiet threat to this new version of himself. From that moment on, every comment he used to belittle me in front of others wasn't accidental anymore. Mark was one of the few people who noticed what Ethan was trying to hide. I didn't know that until the day I gave an internal presentation with my team. I was only assigned to cover a few key points. But when I spoke, the room went quiet in a way I'd grown familiar with in large meetings. They weren't noisy. They didn't compliment. But they focused, and that kind of silence is a form of respect. Mark sat in the front row. He tilted his head slightly every time I made a critical point, as if he could see the sharpness in each thing I said. After the session, when everyone walked out, he passed by me and said just one thing. "You see things most people don't." I remembered that line not because it was a compliment, but because it was the only sentence that confirmed I wasn't invisible in that room. I didn't tell Ethan. I knew he wouldn't care. Or worse, he'd say, he was just being polite. And that was when I realized the way Ethan saw me had changed. Not because I'd changed, but because his new success made him feel above more people. And people who feel above rarely bend down to share the spotlight with anyone, even the person who once lifted them up. Back in the present, I could feel Mark's eyes on me again in the middle of the party. He wasn't looking out of curiosity. He looked like someone who was about to put the truth back where it belonged. And when I looked back at him, I saw something Ethan had never noticed in Mark's eyes. He knew I was good, and he was about to say what Ethan had been hiding from this entire room. That was the moment I understood clearly. Whatever Ethan was trying to cover, he wouldn't be able to cover it much longer. The noise in the banquet hall kept rising. Glasses clinked nonstop, and congratulations poured onto Ethan like he was the center of the entire night. And because he was so used to being in that position, the conversation started to tilt in a direction no one expected, except me. The crowd around Ethan grew thicker. A man joked, "Successful man like you? Your marriage must be boring by comparison." Laughter broke out. Another added, "Well, every power couple has one partner who carries the spotlight, right?" I was standing right beside Ethan. But they didn't look at me, and Ethan didn't turn to bring me into the conversation. He laughed, lifted his glass a little, and then said the line that made the whole room inhale at the same time. $5 for anyone willing to take my boring wife out for dinner. There was 1 second of silence, just one. Then laughter exploded, louder than any moment before. They laughed as if I were a joke delivered at the perfect moment. They laughed as if the insult was harmless. They laughed as if I wasn't standing right there, fully aware, fully human. I didn't laugh, I didn't flinch, I didn't react. But something thin and tight inside me, a quiet string I'd been holding for too long, snapped the moment those words hit the air. And the only person who noticed wasn't Ethan. It was Mark. I heard the sound of a glass being set on the table. A small sound, but sharp enough to cut through the noise like a period in the middle of a paragraph. Mark stood across from me, slightly angled. He didn't laugh, he didn't look embarrassed, he didn't pretend it was just a joke. His eyes were steady, clear, and sharper than anyone else at that table would ever dare to be. He looked at Ethan first, then at the group, then finally at me, as if confirming that he was about to say what I knew he'd been holding back for a long time. "Lauren isn't boring," he said, his voice low but clear enough that not even the music could drown it out. The laughter stopped. Stopped completely. Ethan blinked, tilted his head a little, like he couldn't process what was happening. Mark kept going, not giving anyone a chance to cut in. "If anything, she's the reason your proposal didn't fall apart." A few people turned to look at me, eyes wide. Not because they immediately believed it, but because they had no idea there was a story underneath the one Ethan kept telling. Ethan forced a laugh. "Hey Mark, we're just joking." But Mark leaned in slightly, his voice lower and sharper. "No, let's not joke about this." He turned to the group. "The risk analysis that saved the deal? The strategic pivot you all keep praising? That wasn't Ethan's original idea." The air thickened. No one moved. Mark set his hand on the edge of the table and spoke each word with absolute clarity. "Lauren found the flaw. Lauren reframed the risk. Lauren is the reason the numbers made sense." Ethan swallowed hard. I saw his throat tighten. He tried to keep his face steady, but the color drained from it, shifting from wine-flushed red to a pale, startled white. A man in the group turned to Ethan. "Is that true?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. I watched him search for something, any word, but every confident line he'd thrown around all night had vanished. Mark didn't stop there. He added quietly, "And she didn't even ask for credit. But you chose to erase her from the story." That sentence, not loud, not angry, but painfully accurate, dropped over the room like a heavy curtain. No one laughed anymore. No one raised a glass. No one dared look at me for too long. Ethan let out a strained laugh, the kind so twisted I might have felt sorry for him if I weren't the one he'd just turned into a joke. "Come on, guys, we're celebrating." "No need to get serious," he said, trying to loosen the air around us. But everyone just looked at him. Looked at him like they were seeing, for the first time, a truth they weren't comfortable touching. A woman whispered, "He erased her contribution?" Another shook her head. "That's disappointing." The words weren't loud, but they cut straight through the image Ethan had worked so hard to build. I stood less than an arm's length from him, yet I felt completely separated from him. Not by physical distance, but by the truth that had just been laid bare. Ethan didn't just belittle me, he was afraid of the truth about me coming out. Afraid that if people knew I contributed to that success, the spotlight shining on him would dim. Afraid that if anyone saw the strength of my insight, they'd start questioning his actual ability. Afraid that I, the person he was trying so hard to shrink, was the very reason he was standing here tonight. When I looked at him, for the first time that night, he actually looked back at me. No arrogance, no confidence, just the panic of someone who knew the mask he'd been wearing had cracked in front of everyone. And in that moment, I understood something with a clarity that felt almost cold. Ethan wasn't just afraid of losing his image, he was afraid of me. Afraid of the truth about me. Afraid of my insight. Afraid of the part of me he couldn't control or silence. And that was why he wanted me invisible tonight. I stood tall, saying nothing, because I knew one thing, the rest, the part he would have to pay for, didn't need my hands on it. The truth had already started doing its work. The room stayed silent after Mark exposed the truth, and in that moment, I knew it was time to put the final period on this night, in my own way. No anger, no scene, just an ending that made sense. I set my glass on the table, a small movement but enough to pull every gaze away from Ethan and toward me. No clink, no drama, just the calm I'd held for far too long. I stood up. Ethan spun around immediately, his face drained, like he was suddenly faced with something he wasn't prepared to meet. I looked straight at him. No hesitation, no softness, and I said the only line I needed. If I'm boring to you, maybe you don't know me at all. The sentence fell across the table like a clean, sharp cut. No one argued. No one dared breathe too loudly. No one saw it as a joke anymore. I turned and walked away without waiting for his reaction. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the stillness. So quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and steady. I could feel people watching as I moved, not with pity, but with the kind of look given to someone leaving the game and still walking away as the one who won. Ethan froze, like something had pinned him to his chair. When I was only a few steps away, I heard his voice break out, not loud, not confident like before, but shaky. "Lauren, wait." But he didn't stand up. Even in the one moment when he should have been on his feet, coming after me, he stayed seated, gripping the edge of the table as if he were trying to hold together a version of himself that was already cracking apart. His cowardice, laid bare in front of everyone. I walked past Mark. He tilted his head slightly, just enough for me to know he understood I was doing the right thing. He didn't reach out to stop me. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't step into a moment that wasn't his. And that was exactly why I respected him. No one blocked me. No one called after me. No one tried to fill the space I left behind. The banquet doors opened, and when I stepped through, the air outside was cooler than I expected. A kind of cold that made the weight in my chest ease, not disappear but lighten. I was sad. A quiet, steady kind of sadness, but not the kind that made me want to go back. Because I knew I wasn't giving up. I was simply walking away from a place that no longer deserved me. And the moment I left, the final twist began. Without my touch, without any need for revenge, the truth handled it on its own. From the door still slightly open behind me, I heard the voice of an older man, a senior executive, the one Ethan had been avoiding all night. "Ethan, about your proposal. I've been reviewing the documents." I stopped for a second, not turning around. His voice was low, slow, but heavy with doubt. "The risk section. The structure looks familiar, very similar to Lauren's presentation last quarter." The air behind me shifted. A new tension filled the room. Sharper, heavier. He continued, "Why is her framework in your proposal, under your name?" No one said anything for a few seconds. I could picture Ethan's face, panicked, scrambling, unable to find a single word to save himself. Then came the line that collapsed the entire image he'd spent the whole night building. "We value transparency here. Are you taking credit for someone else's work?" I didn't need to turn around to know. Ethan was losing face. Ethan was having his competence questioned. Ethan was being exposed in front of the very people he'd tried to impress all evening. I just stood there, my hand resting lightly on the door, and felt a calm spread through me. Not satisfaction, but balance, a sense of things falling back into their rightful place. Everything he planted in me tonight returned to him exactly as it should. I walked down the hallway, leaving behind a man watching his image collapse, a room full of disappointed eyes, and a truth he could no longer shove back into the dark. I didn't need to look back. I didn't need to say another word. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. I took a quiet breath, looked out at the open space ahead, wide, clear, silent, and thought, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up and walk away. I don't know how Ethan will retell tonight. I don't know if he'll ever repair the crack in his career. But I know this. I didn't let myself shrink for anyone. And that is the clearest win. What would you do if the person you trusted most turned out to be the one who dismissed you the most? Tell me in the comments. I'd really love to hear your thoughts.